The sun hung low over the backyard, casting a warm golden haze over the neatly trimmed lawn and the cluster of relatives milling around the patio. The air was thick with the scent of grilled meat and sweet barbecue sauce, the kind of smell that usually brought back childhood memories of summer evenings and laughter echoing under fairy lights. But today none of that warmth reached me. I stood near the folding table stacked with paper plates and plastic cups, holding a tray of crudité like a waitress at someone else's party. The carrots and celery sticks had started to sweat in the heat, and so had I. My sundress clung to the small of my back, but it wasn't the humidity that made me uncomfortable. It was the man I had married. Trevor was in his element, beer in hand, standing near the grill with his brothers, cracking jokes with that familiar smugness that always made my stomach tighten. The kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The kind of laugh that made people look over their shoulders before joining in. I could hear snippets of their conversation drifting through the murmur of the crowd, the clinking of ice in glasses and the sizzle of burgers on the grill. And then it happened. "Ask Megan about her hobbies," Trevor said loudly, his voice cutting through the noise like a saw blade. "She's really into adult coloring books now. Says it helps with her stress." He made a show of air quotes around the word stress. Laughter rippled among his brothers and a few cousins nearby. I felt every pair of eyes shift toward me, some flickering with amusement, others with discomfort. A few just pretended not to hear. "She even bought gel pens," he added, dragging the words out like they were some kind of punchline. "You know, like the ones 12-year-olds use in middle school? Next thing you know, she'll be starting a sticker collection." A few people laughed again, nervously this time, uncertain whether it was really okay. I could see his sister Dana glance in my direction and then quickly look away, pretending to be interested in her drink. My heart started pounding in my chest, not from embarrassment but from something deeper. Rage maybe, or heartbreak. Or both. My hands tightened on the edges of the plastic tray. He knew exactly what he was doing. This wasn't the first time. It had started small little digs here and there that he passed off as jokes. Comments about how I didn't contribute enough since I was working part-time. Jabs about my weird taste in books and how I spent more time with imaginary characters than real people. At first I had laughed along, too afraid to make a scene. Too in love maybe, or too hopeful he would change. But 3 years had passed and nothing had changed. If anything, it had gotten worse. I stood there, feeling the eyes of my extended family like pins against my skin. Not one person spoke up. Not one person said, "That's not funny." And Trevor just grinned, pleased with himself like he had scored some kind of victory. I wanted to disappear. I wanted to throw the tray across the yard. I wanted to scream. But instead I set it down carefully on the table like my hands weren't shaking. I excused myself quietly as if I was the one who had done something wrong and walked toward the house. Behind me the party went on. Someone turned up the music. A child started crying over a spilled drink. Trevor didn't follow. He never did when I walked away. Inside, the cool air of the kitchen hit me like a slap. I leaned against the counter, gripping its edge, trying to breathe. My reflection in the window above the sink stared back at me. Flushed cheeks, wide eyes, the tight line of my mouth. I didn't cry. I hadn't cried over Trevor in a long time. That part of me had dried up after the second year, after too many nights lying in bed beside a man who only touched me when he wanted something, who never listened, who never saw me. What hurt more than his words was the silence that followed them. The way everyone just let it happen. The way no one thought it was strange or cruel or humiliating. It made me realize how isolated I had become. Somewhere along the way I had stopped reaching out, stopped confiding in anyone. Maybe because I didn't want them to confirm what I already knew, that I had made a terrible mistake. That backyard, full of familiar faces, suddenly felt like the loneliest place in the world. I stayed in the kitchen for a long time, long enough for the sounds of laughter to blur into a dull background hum. I could still hear Trevor's voice through the open window, still holding court, still telling jokes. Probably moving on to someone else now that I had walked away. That was always the way with him. One target at a time. And as I stood there, the cold counter beneath my palms, something inside me finally shifted. Not snapped exactly, but settled. Like the last piece of a puzzle locking into place. I didn't want this anymore. Not the house, not the parties, not the constant humiliation packaged as humor. Not the marriage. I took a slow breath and straightened my spine. This was the last time I would let him make me feel small in front of people who claimed to love me. This was the last time I would play the good wife, holding her tongue for the sake of keeping the peace. Because there was no peace. Not really. Not for me. I was still in the kitchen, standing motionless by the sink, when I heard the sudden hush ripple through the backyard like a gust of wind flattening tall grass. The murmur of idle chatter died down, and even the music, which had been playing lazily from a Bluetooth speaker on the patio, seemed to fade into the background. I couldn't hear the exact words at first, just the change in energy, The kind of sharp stillness that follows something unexpected, something not part of the rehearsed family script. Then I heard Alex's voice. Come, bo, clear. I could make out every word even through the screen door and the laughter that had abruptly vanished. She brings a plate of vegetables to your barbecue and you mock her like she's a child, he said, his voice steady, but with a force beneath it like a current under still water. You do this all the time, Trevor. You don't lift her up. You drag her down. Every single chance you get. There was no mistaking the silence that followed that sentence. It was thick and awkward and long, the kind of silence that made people stare at their shoes or pretend to check their phones just to avoid looking at each other. I moved a little closer to the window, heart suddenly hammering, not out of fear this time but disbelief. No one ever said anything. No one had ever dared. You don't deserve her, Alex continued, and this time I could hear the shift in his tone. Not angry, not dramatic, but certain. Final. If you can't appreciate her, if all you know how to do is belittle her in front of everyone like she's some kind of joke, then let her go. You don't value her. So let her go. A sharp exhale cut through the quiet. Trevor. Probably scoffing, maybe rolling his eyes like he always did when someone challenged him. I could imagine the tight line of his jaw, the forced smirk he'd wear to cover up the fact that someone had finally called him out. I imagined his pride wounding itself into a knot in his throat. But he didn't respond. He didn't have the words. No sarcasm, no cheap comeback. Nothing. I leaned against the doorframe, barely breathing. I had never heard anyone speak like that on my behalf. Not in years, maybe not ever. Not with that kind of clarity, not without hesitating or softening the blow. It wasn't loud. It wasn't dramatic. It was just honest. Measured. True. And that truth had fallen on the backyard like a sudden thunderclap in the middle of a summer evening. No one knew what to say after Alex spoke. I could sense it. That frozen moment when people feel something shift but aren't sure if they're allowed to acknowledge it. Even the children seemed quieter than usual, their play subdued as if they too sensed the strange weight in the air. I stepped back from the window, pressing my hand to my chest, trying to settle the wild beating of my heart. I wasn't sure what I felt. Gratitude, yes, but also something deeper. Relief. Recognition. Like I had just been pulled back into focus after spending too long blurred out of my own life. Alex and I had never been close. He lived in Atlanta and we only saw each other at family events like this, maybe once or twice a year. We'd exchanged polite conversation over potato salad or while waiting for dessert, but nothing more. He wasn't one of the loud ones. He wasn't the type to insert himself into other people's problems. That made what he said even more powerful. He hadn't spoken up to make a point or to draw attention to himself. He spoke because it was the right thing to do. And for the first time in a very long time I felt seen. Not pitted. Not ignored. Not judged. I didn't go back outside right away. I couldn't. My legs were shaking, not from fear but from the way adrenaline rushes out of you when a long-held breath finally releases. I stayed where I was, letting that moment settle inside me, letting those words echo over and over in my head. If you can't appreciate her, let her go. Somewhere deep inside I felt the truth of that settle like a stone in still water. Something had shifted not just out there on the patio but in me, and there was no going back. 3 months ago, on a Tuesday evening that began like any other, quiet, uneventful, filled with the dull rhythm of routine, I had gone to plug in Trevor's phone because he always let the battery die. It was sitting on the kitchen counter next to his keys, and without thinking I picked it up, attached the charger and glanced at the screen. One notification was still lit up in the corner, a preview of a message, nothing too obvious. But the name was there. A name I didn't recognize. Carly. Not Carly. Not Carla. Not someone I could mentally sort into his coworkers or extended family or gym acquaintances. It was a new name entirely and the message was short, too short. Just 5 words. Last night was incredible. Again. I remember the way my breath caught before I could even finish reading it. The room didn't change but everything in it suddenly felt unfamiliar. The walls looked flatter, the light colder, the silence louder. It felt like someone had reached into my chest and knocked something loose, something I didn't know was delicate until it shattered. I opened the message. I don't know why. Maybe part of me thought I'd find a reasonable explanation. Maybe I still wanted to believe I was wrong. That it was a misunderstanding. That it wasn't what it looked like. But it was exactly what it looked like. There were more messages. Dozens. Nothing poetic, nothing sentimental. Just a slow stream of late-night exchanges, carefully hidden, with just enough caution to avoid detection but with enough intimacy to leave no doubt. Her replies were scattered with winks and inside jokes I couldn't decipher. Her tone casual, familiar, confident. His words were flirtatious, eager, reckless. One message had a photo I could never unsee. Another referred to a weekend when he had told me he was helping his father fix the deck. I didn't say anything that night. I couldn't. I sat on the edge of our bed while he brushed his teeth and scrolled through news headlines like nothing had changed. He kissed my forehead before turning off the light. I didn't kiss him back. He didn't notice. The next morning I deleted nothing. I didn't confront him. I didn't cry or scream or pack a bag. I wish I could say I stormed out or demanded answers. But I didn't. I waited. I let the knowledge fester inside me like a slow poison. I watched him come and go, carry on like nothing was wrong, while I slowly unraveled in silence. Why? Because I kept hoping that maybe it wasn't real. Maybe it had ended. Maybe it was just a mistake. A lapse. Something we could work through. Some desperate part of me wanted to believe in the version of Trevor I had met 4 years ago. The one who brought me flowers for no reason, who stayed up late to listen to my rants about work, who kissed me like I was something precious. I kept telling myself he would return to that man. That maybe he was just lost. That maybe I was failing him somehow, and if I could just be better, more attentive, more fun, more everything, he'd come back. But Alex's words today shattered that illusion like glass dropped from a rooftop. You don't deserve her. If you can't appreciate her, let her go. It wasn't just about the cruel jokes or the smug way Trevor stripped me down in front of our family with every dig he passed off as humor. It wasn't just about the coloring books or the gel pens or the way he made me feel like nothing I did was worthy of respect. It was about the truth. The truth I had seen in those messages. The truth I had buried under layers of denial. The truth I had silenced inside me every day since that night with Carly's message glowing on his screen like a flare. He was never going to change. Because the betrayal wasn't an accident. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was deliberate. It was ongoing. It was something he maintained, nurtured, protected with lies and manipulation. And I had let myself pretend it didn't matter because I was too scared to face what it really meant. That the life I had built with him, the home, the shared bank accounts, the vacations with forced smiles, the holidays where we played the happy couple, was an illusion. But illusions don't survive moments like this. When Alex stood in the yard and called Trevor out, when his voice broke the performance everyone else had silently agreed to uphold, I felt something crack inside me, but not in a way that hurt. In a way that made space. In a way that allowed light to finally touch the parts of me I had buried for too long. I wasn't crazy. I wasn't imagining it. I wasn't overreacting. He really didn't value me. And someone had finally said it out loud. I stepped back out onto the patio after what felt like hours in the kitchen, though it had only been minutes. The sky was dimming now, the golden light fading into a softer, cooler blue, and the air had shifted. Not cooler, not warmer, just heavier. People had gone quiet, conversations thin and awkward, as if no one quite knew how to restart the party after what Alex had said. Plates were still being held, drinks still halfway to lips, but eyes were darting around, avoiding contact, avoiding me. Trevor was standing near the grill again, this time alone, jaw tight, hand clenched around a bottle like it might splinter if he squeezed hard enough. He didn't look at me as I approached, didn't move at all except for the slight twitch in his temple, that pulsing tell he always had when he was angry but trying to appear composed. Then he said it. Sharp, dismissive, like flicking a crumb from his shirt. Go get me another beer. We'll talk about this later. That sentence. That casual practice command. He'd said it before in so many different ways. When I brought up something that mattered to me. When I cried and he told me to calm down, or not now. When he wanted to brush something aside, shift control back to himself. He didn't yell, not this time. He didn't curse. He didn't need to. It was the tone that carried the sting, the expectation that I would obey without question. That I'd fetch the beer and wait quietly for him to decide when and how this talk would happen. And maybe in the past I would have. But not this time. I felt the word rise in me, not like a scream, but like a truth I had kept locked in the base of my throat for years. It didn't explode out of me. It didn't tremble. It landed. Thought. No. He blinked. What? I looked straight at him, my voice louder now, clearer, so there would be no misunderstanding, no way for him to twist it. I said no. The air cracked. The silence wasn't like before. It wasn't awkward or uncertain. It was stunned. Pure ringing shock. No one moved. No one said anything. Trevor's mouth opened slightly as if he couldn't believe I'd said it, as if the word itself was offensive. He looked around like expecting someone to laugh, to back him up, to roll their eyes and join in on whatever reaction he was supposed to have. But no one did. Not his brothers. Not his cousins. Not even Dana. My chest rose and fell, my hands still at my sides, steady. I didn't fold. I didn't look away. I didn't smile to soften the blow or offer some excuse for my defiance. I just stood there and gave him the answer I should have given years ago. He stepped forward slightly, the beer bottle lowering in his hand, his face twisting not into confusion now but anger. What the hell's wrong with you? He asked, low and tight, like he was trying to keep it between us, like it wasn't too late for that. Nothing's wrong with me, I said, and I meant it. I'm just not doing this anymore. He stared at me for a long moment, waiting, I think, for me to take it back, to shrink, to apologize, to laugh it off like it was just another emotional flare-up. But I didn't. The realization hit him slowly, the way storms roll in. No lightning at first, just the change in pressure, the heaviness in the air, the unspoken certainty that something is ending. His nostrils flared. His jaw clenched so tightly I thought he might crack a tooth. Then without a word he turned. He walked through the yard, past the tables of food, past the cousins who suddenly found their paper plates extremely interesting, past the aunts who stared down into their iced tea like it could offer some wisdom. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't look back. The screen door slammed behind him with a sound that felt both petty and final. And I was left standing there, alone, surrounded by people who had all seen it happen, every bit of it, and still hadn't spoken a single word in my defense. They were all still quiet, still processing or pretending it didn't involve them. Maybe some of them felt guilty. Maybe some of them agreed with me but didn't know how to say it. Maybe some didn't care at all. But for the first time in 3 years I wasn't afraid of that silence. Because I had spoken. I had said it out loud in front of everyone. Oh, and I meant it. I used to believe that love, real love, began with something quiet, like comfort or ease. But with Trevor it didn't start that way. It started like a spark to dry wood. Fast, bright, impossible to ignore. He was charming in the kind of way that didn't feel manufactured. He remembered the names of my coworkers after only hearing them once, brought me my favorite pastries without asking, left little notes in my car door that said things like, "You're killing it," or, "I'm the luckiest man alive." I met him when I wasn't looking for anything. I had just started my job at Oak and Ivy Exteriors, barely a year out of grad school, still unsure if my degree in environmental design would turn into anything more than a series of unpaid internships and freelance gigs that paid in gift cards. But Trevor made me feel like I was already someone. Like I didn't need to prove anything. He asked me questions about my work, came to tour a project I'd helped design, stood next to me while I explained the concept behind native planting palettes and sustainable layout choices. He nodded thoughtfully and told me he'd never met someone so passionate about making the outside world look better. I laughed at that. It was an oversimplification, but it was kind. He proposed fast. 8 months in. We were in Asheville on a weekend trip to see the fall leaves, and he took me up to a lookout point right as the sun was setting. There was a photographer waiting nearby, already paid for, already cued. He got down on one knee and the ring glowed against the sky behind him, and I said yes so quickly I barely heard myself. The first year was everything I thought marriage would be: joint grocery lists, shared passwords, Sundays tangled in bedsheets and bad movies. He made me feel chosen, like I had won something. And I was too swept up in the idea of us to notice the quiet ways he began taking control. It started small. He teased me about how much time I spent sketching ideas after work, said I was a little obsessed with dirt. I laughed along. Then he started making jokes in front of friends. "Megan's got a PhD in shrubbery," he'd say, and everyone would chuckle and I'd force a smile. I thought it was harmless. I thought he just didn't understand the field. But by the second year it wasn't just jokes. He started questioning why I worked so many hours when the projects weren't that serious. He called it playing in the dirt, or doing makeup for lawns. When I came home proud of a contract we landed with a big corporate office park, a job I'd spent months pitching and revising, he barely looked up from his phone. "Cool," he said, then asked what we were doing for dinner. When I got promoted to project lead he didn't even tell his family. I remember sitting at a barbecue not unlike the one today when someone asked what I'd been up to lately. Before I could open my mouth he jumped in. "Same old stuff, planting bushes, trimming trees," he said, as if I were a gardener who came by twice a week with pruning shears. They all laughed. I laughed too. But I felt something inside me fold in half. My work meant something to me. Designing outdoor spaces wasn't just about plants or layouts or aesthetics. It was about creating places that felt safe, alive, human. I had worked for years to be taken seriously in a male-dominated field where women were often relegated to picking flower arrangements while men handled the architecture. I had fought to be in the room. But with Trevor I was never in the room. He never came to the company open houses anymore. He'd sigh when I asked him to review my portfolio updates. He once told me flat out that he didn't understand why I was so obsessed with being recognized. "It's not like you're saving lives," he said, like that settled the matter. I didn't respond. I didn't know how to. His disregard wasn't loud. He didn't yell, didn't slam doors, didn't tell me I was worthless. But somehow it hurt more. The way he dismissed the things I loved. Quietly, casually, like they were nothing. It made me question if what I did really mattered at all. And I began to shrink. I stopped bringing work home. I stopped talking about design at dinner. I turned down a speaking opportunity at a local university because he said it was too much for a side hustle. I started believing him, believing that what I did was small. That I was small. Looking back now, I see how subtle it all was. How invisible the unraveling felt as it happened. I gave up pieces of myself so slowly I didn't even notice they were gone. By the third year, I couldn't recognize the version of myself who once stayed up all night sketching a proposal for a rooftop garden in the city center. That woman had been replaced by someone careful. Someone quiet. Someone who made herself smaller so the man next to her could feel larger. And yet, even then, I kept telling myself it was just a phase. That all couples struggled. That if I was patient, if I worked harder, if I let the little things slide, the Trevor I fell in love with would come back. But he never did. Because he wasn't lost. He hadn't changed. He'd always been this man. I was just too in love with the beginning to see it. It didn't happen all at once. The shift was gradual, barely noticeable at first. Like a room growing darker as the sun sets behind heavy clouds. One day Trevor simply started carrying his phone with him everywhere. To the bathroom, to the laundry room, even just to take the trash out. It never left his pocket, not even when he showered. I'd see it on the counter while the steam billowed around the mirror, the screen facing down, always silenced, always guarded. At first I told myself it was work. He'd just taken on a new position in logistics, overseeing multiple distribution centers along the coast. Late calls weren't unusual. He'd mutter about shipping delays in Charleston or rerouted trucks in Orlando, and I didn't question it. I wanted to believe him. But then the late nights became more frequent. Meetings that couldn't be rescheduled. Overnight trips booked at the last minute. He stopped offering details unless I asked, and even then the answers were vague. Always just enough to be plausible, never enough to feel real. Sometimes I'd wake up at 1 or 2 in the morning and realize he wasn't in bed. I'd find him downstairs on the couch, his face lit by the soft glow of his phone, his expression unreadable. When I entered the room, he'd lock the screen and say he couldn't sleep, claimed his mind was racing with numbers and schedules. I didn't fight. I didn't accuse. I didn't beg. I paid attention. There was a moment, so ordinary it should have meant nothing, that finally shifted something in me. I was folding laundry one Saturday, his phone charging beside the basket. For a second, it buzzed, and before I could even glance at the screen, he appeared out of nowhere, scooping it up with that tight, sharp movement. His body stiffened like I'd touched something sacred. That's when I stopped pretending. Later that night, while he was asleep, I went into his office. The password to his work laptop had never changed. His old dog's name and a random number. He never expected me to look. That's how confident he was. That's how much he thought I wouldn't see him for who he really was. I found everything. Not just one message, not a single slip. Dozens of conversations. Most with Carly. Some with other women, though those threads were shorter, more transactional. But Carly, she was different. She was the one he kept going back to. Their messages weren't shy. There was nothing hidden about them. There were long chains of texts that spanned weeks. Detailed exchanges about their nights together, their next rendezvous, the way she liked the room cold and the lights low. There were voice notes with laughter, inside jokes I couldn't bear to listen to, and photographs. Dozens. Some of her, taken in dim hotel rooms with crisp white sheets and soft lighting. Others of him, bare, grinning, taken in the mirror of a bathroom I didn't recognize. There were receipts. Screenshots. Confirmation emails for bookings in Savannah and Jacksonville, both cities he had claimed were stops on his routing schedule. One reservation included champagne add-ons and a spa package. I remember staring at that line item and feeling something dislodge in my chest, like the last thread of denial had snapped. But still I didn't scream. I didn't confront him in the middle of the night or tear his phone out of his hand or accuse him across the dinner table. I stayed calm. I started keeping records. Quietly, methodically, like someone watching the structure of their life collapse in slow motion and deciding not to run, but to document the destruction. I forwarded emails to myself. I took screenshots of texts and stored them on an external drive. I took photos of hotel confirmations with my phone, cropped and time-stamped. Every smile he gave me after that felt like glass in my throat. Every casual kiss on the cheek before leaving for Savannah made my skin crawl. He would come home smelling like the hotel soap I once recognized from a trip we took years ago. He had used that same soap with her. And still I played the part. Because I wanted to know everything. I wanted to understand the scope of it. Not just the affair itself, but the person he had become when I wasn't watching. I needed to see it in full. I needed to be sure, without emotion clouding my vision, without hope softening the truth. He had lived a second life behind my back. And I had lived beside it, half awake, half believing, for far too long. It was almost dark when Alex found me. Most of the family had already left, slipping out one by one with murmured goodbyes and tight, unreadable smiles. The patio lights buzzed softly above our heads, casting everything in a pale yellow wash. I was sitting on the low garden wall by the hydrangeas, arms folded tightly, watching the last flickers of the grill die out. My heart was still thudding, not from fear anymore but from the hollow aftermath of finally saying the word, no, and meaning it. Alex didn't approach like someone with idle concern. He didn't wear pity on his face or the awkward discomfort people tend to show when they don't know what to say. He sat beside me quietly, giving me a moment before speaking. I didn't say everything out there, he began, his voice low and firm, not out of hesitation but control. I didn't want to do it in front of everyone. I didn't look at him right away. I kept my gaze on the yard, the scattered paper cups, the sagging tablecloth, the lawn chairs skewed like the remains of some long-finished performance. But I felt something shift in me at the tone of his voice. I saw him, he said. A few months ago. In Dallas. That made me turn. He looked straight ahead, not at me. His jaw was tight, like he'd been holding this in for longer than he was comfortable with. I was there for a conference. I stayed at the Marriott downtown. Walked into the lobby after dinner and there he was. Trevor. With a woman I didn't recognize at first. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. She was wrapped around his arm like they'd been together forever. Laughing, whispering. They didn't see me. I ducked behind a pillar like a goddamn cliché. I felt sick, Megan. Not just because it was him but because of how comfortable they looked. How normal it seemed. His voice tightened but he kept going. They were on their way up to the rooms. I followed them into the elevator lobby and I'm not proud of it but I waited. I needed to be sure I wasn't imagining it. That it wasn't someone who just looked like Trevor. He finally turned to look at me. There was no hesitation in his eyes, just the weight of what he was about to say next. They didn't come down for a while. I sat at the bar, ordered something I didn't touch and tried to forget it. But a little after midnight I saw them again at the bar this time. Drinking, talking like nothing in the world could touch them. I didn't ask questions. I didn't have to. The image was already burned into my mind. The smug ease, the casual betrayal, the way Trevor always managed to carry on without guilt. I was going to walk away, Alex continued more quietly now. But then I heard them talking. Not about each other. About you. He paused and in that breath I felt something cold trickle down the back of my spine. Carly was laughing about how you don't even know what he's moving around. And Trevor said something like, she trusts me with all the paperwork. She has no clue what she signed when we refinanced. Then he said, as long as she keeps thinking we're just broke, I can keep everything neat. The silence that followed those words was different from all the others that day. This one was sharp. My entire body went cold. He's not just cheating, Megan, Alex said, softer now, almost like he hated to say it. He's using you. Financially. I don't know the full extent, but I know the tone of a man who's hiding something. And from what I heard, it's not just about betrayal. It's about money. Possibly fraud. I stared at the stones beneath my feet, the small cracks in the path, the flecks of dirt clinging to my shoes. For a long time I said nothing. Not because I was shocked. Not because I doubted Alex. But because somewhere inside, in the quiet part of me that had grown sharper with every silent discovery, I already knew. I had sensed it in the way Trevor always brushed off my questions about our accounts, how he insisted on doing the taxes alone, how he made me sign documents quickly, always on his terms, always in passing. I had seen the little signs, credit cards I didn't recognize, a joint savings account that seemed thinner each month, unexpected withdrawals he waved off as monthly bills, or fees I didn't need to worry about. But I had worried. And now the shape of that worry had a name. Fraud. Not just infidelity. Not just emotional cruelty. But theft. Betrayal on a level so deep, so methodical that it almost didn't feel real. Alex sat quietly beside me, letting the truth land, giving me the dignity of space, not crowding me with more words than necessary. I felt a strange calm settle in. Not peace, not numbness, something colder, sharper. Resolve. The man I had married had not just broken my heart. He had used my trust like a shield, like cover, to manipulate and take from me slowly and without remorse. And I had let him, believing for far too long that love was supposed to be patient, forgiving, loyal. But what he had done wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. Repeated. Calculated. And now I had to decide what to do with everything I knew. The night after Alex told me what he had seen in Dallas, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, every muscle in my body clenched, every thought churning in tight, suffocating circles. There were too many pieces now, too many truths dragging themselves out of the shadows all at once. And one memory kept rising above the rest, louder, sharper, too specific to ignore. It was the money. A year ago my grandmother passed away. She had lived a long, quiet life in the same little brick house in Winston-Salem, growing tomatoes in the backyard, folding napkins into perfect rectangles, never wasting a penny. I loved her in the kind of way that feels rooted in bone, constant, deep, unquestioning. I didn't expect her to leave me anything. But in her will she left me $80,000. It was everything she had managed to save over a lifetime and she entrusted it to me. I remember the day I received the funds. I didn't tell many people. Only my parents, a close friend, and Trevor. And even then I was careful. I opened a separate investment account in my name, outside of our joint bank accounts. It wasn't a secret, but it was protected. I set it up with a small local firm that specialized in sustainable portfolios, something I knew my grandmother would have appreciated. I felt like I was doing the right thing, letting it grow quietly, untouched, something for the future. For safety. For peace of mind. Trevor hadn't shown much interest at the time. When I told him, his reaction was subdued. No questions, no comments, just a vague, "That's great," and a half-hearted smile. He didn't ask what I planned to do with it. He never brought it up again. Or so I thought. When Alex told me about Dallas, I thought the worst of it had already been said. That catching Trevor with Carly was the betrayal, and hearing them discuss my finances was just a callous extension of his emotional cruelty. But then Alex paused and looked at me again, and I saw something shift in his expression. Something more serious, more careful. "There's one more thing," he said, his voice even lower now. "I didn't want to tell you unless I was absolutely sure you'd want to know." I remember feeling the air press heavier around us, like the night itself was holding its breath. "She asked him about the inheritance," Alex said. "Carly." I heard her mention it. She said something like, "So, what's the deal with Megan's little investment account?" Thought that was off limits. And Trevor laughed. He said, "You'd be surprised what you can get someone to sign when they're in love." My stomach dropped. Not the way it does when you hear bad news. It dropped in that slow, aching way, like something was being torn out of me. My skin flushed cold, but my hands were burning. "He didn't say exactly what he did," Alex continued. "But the way he said it, it didn't sound like a joke. He sounded proud of himself. Like he was clever. Like he had gotten away with something." For a long time I didn't speak. I couldn't. I just stared out into the dark yard, where the hydrangeas had gone shadowy and the patio lights flickered like they might burn out at any moment. The investment account wasn't supposed to be accessible. I had set it up under my name with its own login, its own two-factor verification. I had never shared the password, never given Trevor access. But then I started thinking back. He had sat beside me while I logged in once or twice. He had watched me type. I had used the same base password I used for years, just with minor variations. He had seen my mail. He had watched me sign forms. I trusted him. And that trust, the kind I thought was just the quiet foundation of marriage, was now the very weapon he may have used to steal from me. I remembered a strange transaction I noticed 6 months ago. Just a small adjustment in the fund, a movement of assets I didn't recognize. When I called the firm, they explained it as a portfolio rebalancing. I accepted it, didn't think twice. It was normal, they said. Automated. Now I wasn't so sure. Because now I had to look at every moment of silence, every shrug, every joke he made about how I wasn't good with numbers, every time he offered to take care of the paperwork. Now I had to question if that account was ever as secure as I believed it to be. And the worst part wasn't just the possibility that he had stolen from me. The worst part was realizing that while I spent the past year convincing myself I could fix the emotional distance, he had been plotting something quieter, more sinister. He hadn't just lied to me or slept with someone else. He had studied me. Calculated what I would and wouldn't notice. Manipulated my trust like a tool. And then he laughed about it. This wasn't just infidelity. It wasn't even just financial betrayal. It was something colder. More deliberate. A man like Trevor didn't simply fall out of love. He eroded trust until it became permission. He took advantage of my silence. Of my patience. Of the way I'd been taught to keep peace in a marriage, to compromise, to give people the benefit of the doubt. And now, every doubt I had buried came rushing to the surface, undeniable and sharp. The money I thought was mine, quietly growing, safely tucked away, might not even be there anymore. And I had no one to blame but the man I had once promised to trust more than anyone in the world. It was Jessica who finally said the words out loud. We were sitting in my kitchen the morning after Alex's confession, the coffee between us untouched, cooling slowly in chipped mugs neither of us had the energy to replace. I had just told her everything. The hotel in Dallas, the mention of my inheritance, the way Trevor laughed about getting me to sign things. Her face, usually so expressive, had gone completely still. "You need a lawyer. Now." There was no panic in her voice, no dramatic pause, just the sharp clarity of someone who sees a fire and refuses to wait for it to burn the whole house down. I nodded because I already knew. I'd known it last night when I lay awake, eyes fixed on the ceiling, trying to imagine what else he had touched. What else he had taken. Jessica called her cousin, who worked for a small but serious firm downtown, Harper and Lowe Legal. She told her it was urgent. Within an hour, we were sitting in a narrow sunlit office lined with binders and pale gray walls that smelled faintly of lemon cleaner. The nameplate on the door read Diane Morrow Askew, and the woman who greeted us had sharp eyes, short silver hair, and a calm that felt like steel wrapped in velvet. She offered me water, but I didn't take it. My throat felt too tight. I told her everything. Slowly, carefully. I didn't cry. I laid it out like facts, piece by piece. The inheritance, the investment account, the messages, the suspicious transactions, the hotel bookings. Jessica sat beside me silently, not interrupting, just anchoring me with her presence. Diane didn't interrupt either. She took notes with a black pen, never once breaking eye contact. When I finished, she leaned back slightly and said, "We're going to need access to everything. Every shared account. Every email. Every document he's ever had you sign." That same day, under Diane's direction, we froze all joint bank accounts. I signed documents that prevented Trevor from making any additional withdrawals, especially from our shared savings, which had already been reduced to a fraction of what it once was. Diane made calls while I sat quietly at the end of the long conference table, answering when necessary, the weight of everything finally catching up with me in the form of a slow, simmering numbness. By that afternoon, Jessica and I had gathered every financial document I could find: bank statements, credit reports, old tax filings, loan paperwork, even digital copies of forms Trevor had asked me to just sign real quick over the past 2 years. Diane's paralegal scanned them all into a folder labeled Megan L. Priority Fraud Case. It wasn't until the next morning that the worst of it was confirmed. Diane called me at 9:13 a.m. I remember the exact time because I was still in bed, staring at the same ceiling, holding my phone like it might burn me. Her voice was calm but lower than yesterday. "We found a transfer. Actually, several." She explained that Trevor had accessed the Oak and Ivy investment fund using forged authorization forms. Not just once. Multiple times over the past 8 months. The most significant was a $38,000 transfer, quietly moved from my personal account into a newly opened joint account under both his name and a woman named Carly Jensen. The paper trail was thin but not invisible. Diane's team had traced it through internal banking logs and confirmed the signatures used on the authorization didn't match mine. "He copied your signature," she said. "Sloppily, but enough to pass internal checks. And since your account was held at a smaller firm with limited oversight, they processed the transfer without flagging it." $38,000. My grandmother's savings. Money she spent her life putting away, bit by bit, penny by penny, instead of spending on herself. Money meant to give me peace of mind, security, a future. And he had funneled it into an account with the woman he cheated on me with. It didn't even feel real. I stared out the window while Diane kept speaking, her words starting to blur into clinical phrases. Fraudulent authorization, civil liability, possible criminal charges. But none of them felt heavier than the truth already sitting on my chest. He had stolen from me. Not by force. Not in the middle of the night. But slowly. Methodically. With forged paperwork, false reassurances, and a confidence so brazen it bordered on delusional. The betrayal wasn't just emotional anymore. It was legal. Tangible. Traceable. Jessica drove me home from the office in silence, one hand tight around the steering wheel, the other occasionally brushing mine when she sensed I was spiraling too deep into my own head. I didn't speak. I didn't even cry. I felt stripped bare, emptied of the capacity for shock. I had loved a man who saw my trust as a resource to exploit, who smiled at me over dinner while siphoning away the last gift my grandmother had ever given me, who looked me in the eye and lied as easily as he breathed. And now the truth was no longer just mine to carry. It lived in documents, in bank records, in copies of fake signatures and hidden accounts. And it was only the beginning. The morning we filed the papers, the sky was overcast, thick with that gray heaviness that presses everything closer to the ground. It suited the moment perfectly. No lightness, no illusions, just the weight of what was real finally being dealt with. Diane sat across from me at the conference table with a folder so full it barely stayed closed. Her voice was measured, steady, but there was steel in it when she spoke. "This isn't just a divorce, Megan. What he did, this isn't a marital dispute. Fraud. And we're going after both." There was no hesitation in me. Not anymore. I didn't flinch when she laid out the process. Petition for divorce on grounds of financial misconduct, a separate civil case for damages, and the start of a criminal complaint. She told me the timeline would be long, that it would be exhausting. But I was ready. The fear that used to wrap itself around my ribs like a vice was gone. It had burned away in the face of the facts. The bank statements, the forged documents, the money he had siphoned off with a smile and a kiss goodbye. We filed everything that day. Within 48 hours, the court approved a motion to freeze the remaining assets, joint and individual. Diane acted quickly, contacting every institution where Trevor had access. Our primary bank, the investment firm, even the credit card companies. She filed a request for financial discovery and had a forensic accountant begin combing through the last 3 years of our finances. Then came the restraining order. It wasn't about violence. Trevor had never raised a hand to me. But the emotional pressure, the deception, and the now constant barrage of messages from him were enough to qualify. The court granted it under the claim of coercive behavior and ongoing financial threat. He was to have no contact with me, not through calls, messages, email, or third parties. But that didn't stop him. The first voicemail came the evening after he was served. I didn't answer. My phone lit up once, then again. I let them go to voicemail. Then I listened. The first message was short, just his voice, sharp, shaking with anger. So this is how you want to play it. You don't answer your phone now? You think this is going to go your way? I know what you're doing. You're not going to win. I deleted it. An hour later another one came. Megan, just, listen, babe. I lost it earlier, but come on. You're being dramatic. A lawyer. Freezing our accounts. What the hell are you thinking? Just call me. We can fix this. I didn't reply. That night I got 4 more messages. Each one different. One was almost calm, the next full of rage, then pleading, then guilt. I listened to all of them with a kind of detached clarity I never knew I had in me. Like I was watching a man unravel in a play I no longer had a role in. He didn't even sound like the person I married. Or maybe he finally did and I was just hearing it for the first time without the filter of hope. By the second day the messages had shifted tone entirely. I never meant to hurt you. You don't understand what it's like, what I've been dealing with. It wasn't serious with her. It was a mistake. A stupid mistake. But you're trying to ruin me. Don't do this. Please. I recorded every single message. Sent them to Diane. She cataloged them with the rest of the documentation, storing them in the legal file marked Trevor Langley Civil and Criminal Proceedings. Each time I heard his voice I expected to feel that old flicker of panic. The instinct to retreat, to appease, to smooth things over. But it never came. Not once. Because I wasn't afraid anymore. I had walked through the worst of it. The discovery, the deception, the knowledge that the man I had trusted with everything had treated me like a mark, like a convenience, like a vault he could crack open with charm and familiarity. And I had survived it. Not only that, I had acted. I had taken control. Frozen the damage. Exposed the lies. And now the law was catching up with him. The divorce was underway, but more than that, the criminal investigation had begun. Forging my signature, rerouting funds into a hidden joint account, lying on official documents. Those weren't just immoral. They were illegal. Diane had already spoken to the DA's office. It would take time, she warned me. There would be interviews, financial reviews, subpoenas. But the case was strong. He couldn't hide behind charm in a courtroom. Every time I listened to his voicemails, I heard a man who had lost control, not because something had been taken from him unjustly, but because for the first time someone had said no. Someone had pulled back the curtain and seen him for what he really was. And that someone was me. There was no going back now. Not for him. Not for me. And I didn't want to. The day of the hearing arrived under a cold, metallic sky, the kind that seemed to strip all color from the world. I sat in the hallway outside the courtroom, my palms flat on my knees, the edges of my breath held in my chest. Diane sat beside me, calm, collected, the Navy file folder on her lap thick with everything we had gathered over the last few months. Documents, screenshots, voice messages, notarized statements, bank transfers. Every lie, every signature he forged, every dollar he took without my knowledge lived in that folder, now arranged in chronological order, labeled and backed by expert testimony. When our case was called and I stepped into the courtroom, it felt like crossing some invisible threshold I could never return from. The walls were high, the wood polished, the silence tight and heavy. Trevor was already at the defendant's table, wearing a suit I had picked out for him once at a department store sale. Looked too clean for him now. He didn't look at me. Not once. Diane stood tall, her voice unwavering as she addressed the court. She began with the timeline, how Trevor and I married, how financial power slowly shifted into his hands, and how he used access, familiarity, and emotional manipulation to execute unauthorized financial actions. Then came the evidence. Screenshots of messages between him and Carly, where they joked about tapping Megan's fund. Bank statements showing the exact amounts transferred from my personal investment account, $38,000, into the joint account with Carly Jensen. Authentication records from the investment firm, showing how documents bearing my forged signature had been submitted from an IP address connected to Trevor's company laptop. The expert handwriting analysis that confirmed the signatures were not mine. The voicemail recordings where his tone veered from threatening to desperate, all of them played with no drama, just facts. I sat still through it all, my hands folded in my lap, watching his posture tighten with every page turned, every line read out loud. His lawyer objected several times, attempted to reframe the matter as a marital misunderstanding, but it didn't matter. The evidence didn't bend. It stood like iron. When Diane presented the deed to the house, my grandmother's house left to me in her will, the final nail was driven in. Trevor had tried to claim partial ownership through our marriage, arguing that contributions to renovations gave him standing. But Diane presented property records, emails between me and the probate attorney, and a statement from the contractor confirming the work had been funded entirely through the inheritance. The judge listened carefully. He asked only a few questions, pointed ones. He didn't look at Trevor with sympathy. When the ruling came, it landed with the weight of finality that vibrated through every inch of my spine. Trevor was ordered to return the full $38,000, plus interest accrued since the date of the theft. The court declared his financial actions criminal in nature and referred the matter directly to the district prosecutor for fraud and identity forgery. Restitution was ordered with immediate effect. His rights to the property were voided. He was to vacate the home within 7 days and have no further legal claim to it. The word conviction didn't come in that room, not yet, but what did come was a ruling that would follow him into every financial institution, every job application, every background check from this day forward. A criminal charge for fraud. A legal determination that his actions were not mistakes, not misunderstandings but calculated theft. He didn't speak when it was over. Not to the judge. Not to me. I watched as the bailiff handed him the official paperwork, saw the look in his eyes, vacant, stunned, as though the reality had only just begun to register. There was no apology. No outrage. Just a brittle silence that didn't move me in the slightest. As we walked out of the courtroom, Diane placed the file back in her bag with quiet efficiency. She didn't offer platitudes. She didn't tell me I'd be okay or that I'd won. She didn't need to. The truth had been acknowledged, legally, publicly, without apology or shame. And I had stood there through all of it. Not shrinking. Not hiding. He had underestimated me. He had built a world where I was supposed to stay quiet, stay small, and hand over everything. My trust, my name, my money, my future. But now that world belonged to the court records. To the evidence. To the law. And I walked away from it free. News travels fast in certain circles, especially when it's bad. Within a week of the court ruling, Trevor was no longer employed at Mid-South Agri-Tech. It didn't come as a surprise. Diane had told me the conviction would make retention at any corporate level untenable, especially once the internal audit exposed how he had used his company laptop and email to execute personal fraud. They kept it quiet, no press release, no official statement. Just a discreet update to the website where his name vanished from the executive roster, and someone new took over his position in regional logistics coordination. He packed up what was left of his career and his dignity and left Charlotte entirely. Moved to a small town in southern Georgia. Someplace with a name like a weather forecast, flat and forgettable. I only knew because Alex told me, through a cautious text sent one evening that simply read, "He's gone. No one's covering for him anymore." Carly didn't stay. Not even a little. She was gone before the ink dried on the court order. I never learned exactly when she left, whether it was after the bank accounts were frozen or when his name was flagged in the federal database for financial misconduct. But by the time Trevor moved, she had disappeared. Her social media was wiped, no mention of him, no digital trace of the years they spent undermining my life. She left him with the wreckage, the charges, the unpaid restitution, and a future too small for his arrogance. And he had to face it alone. There were no more fancy hotels. No more credit cards slipped from my wallet. No more soft landings paid for with my silence. His world had closed in on itself, and all that remained was the man who had built his life on deception, now stripped of his facade. His parents, Susan and Rick, tried to save face as they always did. They didn't say much publicly. They didn't return my messages after the hearing. At church they kept showing up, heads held high, nodding politely, pretending as if the whispers didn't follow them through every pew. Susan still posted vague inspirational quotes on Facebook. God gives his toughest battles to his strongest soldiers. But the comments dwindled. People weren't fooled anymore. The family image they had curated so carefully over the years had cracked beyond repair. They didn't defend him, but they didn't denounce him either. They hovered in that gray area of shame and denial, hoping that if they stayed quiet long enough, people would forget. But no one did. Because when you raise a man who uses charm to mask cruelty, who believes loyalty is something to be manipulated, and who learns to take without ever giving back, people start to wonder how deep the rot runs. I heard he's renting a one-bedroom in a converted garage behind someone's house now. No Wi-Fi. No yard. No more plans for expansion. No more weekends in Savannah. The only traveling he does is to meet with his probation officer. His LinkedIn profile is still up, frozen in time, a polished version of the man he wanted the world to see. But the endorsements have stopped. The calls have stopped. His phone, once constantly buzzing with business, now echoes with silence. I don't follow his life. I don't check in. But occasionally someone from the fringes will mention him. Another cousin, a former coworker. And always in hushed tones, like his name has become a cautionary tale. A reminder of how quickly appearances collapse under the weight of truth. What I know for certain is this: he built a life on borrowed things, borrowed charm, borrowed trust, borrowed money. And one by one, every borrowed thing demanded to be returned. Now all he has left is himself. And for a man like Trevor, that's the harshest sentence of all. It's been 6 months. Sometimes I still wake up expecting the tension in my chest, the weight of dread that used to greet me before I'd even open my eyes, but it's not there anymore. I breathe deeper now, slower. The mornings are quiet in a way that feels earned, not empty. I make my own coffee without checking my phone, and the silence of the house is not something I fill to distract myself. It's something I enjoy. The house is mine now. Not just legally, though the paperwork finally confirms it, but emotionally, spiritually. The walls feel different. I've painted over the old colors, ripped up the carpet in the upstairs office, replaced the sterile whites with warm, mossy greens and soft earth tones. I planted a fig tree in the backyard and built a small patio garden off the kitchen with native plants that attract butterflies. Sometimes I stand by the back door with bare feet on the cool tile floor, just watching the wind move through the grass. The quiet feels like a kind of music now. Verdant Nest Designs has grown. After years of being boxed in, doubted, minimized, I finally gave myself permission to lead fully. I moved the studio out of my garage and into a rented space downtown, a little brick storefront with tall windows and an ivy-covered side wall. I brought on 2 part-time assistants, both women, both brilliant, and our client list has more than doubled. We're working with real contracts now: schools, parks, city plazas. I spend my days sketching proposals for rooftop gardens and healing green spaces in pediatric hospitals. The kind of work that makes me feel useful and creative and human again. Clients treat me like a professional. They trust me. And more importantly, I trust myself. My friends, my real friends, are still here. Jessica stops by almost every Friday with overpriced pastries and strong opinions. Dana eventually reached out with a message that started with, "I should have said something a long time ago," and we've met for coffee once since. I don't hold grudges. But I don't forget either. I've learned the difference between being nice and being kind. And I keep the kind ones close. And then there's Alex. He drives up from Atlanta every few weeks, sometimes for a weekend, sometimes just to walk through the botanical gardens or get lunch from the food trucks near the square. There's no rush between us. No urgency. We talk. We laugh. We move slowly. He asks about my designs and listens without interruption. I never feel small when he's near. I never feel like I need to shrink to fit. We don't make plans for the future. We make room for the present. That feels new. That feels safe. There are still echoes of before. Letters from the court, a notice from the bank, moments when I come across something in a drawer that reminds me of the years I lost. But I don't feel grief the same way anymore. I feel distance. I feel clarity. I feel like someone who walked into fire and came out not untouched but unafraid. I don't look over my shoulder. I don't second-guess my own voice. For the first time in years, I live without apology. I breathe without guilt. And when I lie in bed at night with the windows open and the air cool against my skin, I don't feel haunted by what happened. I feel anchored by what I survived. This life is mine. Finally, fully, quietly mine. It all started with a joke. A cheap, hollow jab delivered with a plastic smile and a bottle of beer in his hand, meant to get a few laughs at my expense in the middle of a sunny backyard full of people who knew how to look away. That moment, standing there with a tray of vegetables, the laughter catching in my throat, the silence that followed when no one stepped in, was supposed to humiliate me. That was his intention. He wanted me to shrink. To feel foolish. To remember my place as the quiet, agreeable woman who didn't ask for too much, who took the hits with a smile and moved on. But instead, something in me broke in a different way. Not a collapse. Not the kind of break that leaves you shattered on the floor. It was a clean fracture. A release. The snapping of the last thread I had been clinging to, the one that tied me to the illusion I had spent years preserving. That moment didn't destroy me. It exposed me, to myself. It showed me exactly what I had been living with, what I had been tolerating, and what I was no longer willing to carry. For years I let myself believe that endurance was strength. That staying quiet, staying composed, staying loyal even when I was being dismantled piece by piece, made me resilient. But real strength came the second I opened my mouth and said no. Not just to getting another beer. Not just to another conversation pushed to later, but to the entire structure of silence and manipulation that had shaped my life. That barbecue was supposed to be just another day in a long line of days where I kept the peace. But instead it became the start of something else entirely. Something I didn't even know I was allowed to want. A life that belonged to me. I was never meant to stay broken. The betrayal, the lies, the erosion of trust. None of it defined me. I learned how to look at the wreckage without flinching. I learned how to gather what was still good and build something new from it. I faced courtrooms, lawyers, financial documents signed with forged versions of my own name. I stood under the crushing weight of discovery, and instead of collapsing, I rooted deeper. I rose. I am not the woman who let it happen. I am the woman who made it stop. I am not ashamed of the years I spent trying to hold it together. I loved with everything I had, and that love was not wasted. It wasn't weak. It was pure. And when it was no longer safe to give it, I took it back. That was the most powerful thing I've ever done. The life I have now wasn't handed to me. I built it, slowly, intentionally, honestly. From the truth. From the scars. From the sharp understanding that no one was coming to save me but me. And I don't regret a single moment of it. Because it taught me who I am. And now, when I think back to that moment, Trevor standing there laughing thinking he had won, I don't feel anger. I don't feel shame. I feel clarity. It all started with a joke. But I'm the one who got the last word.